Corrupt policeman arrested a black woman. Turns out she's state lawyer. The sky was wide and clean above Eastwood, the kind of day that made you feel like the world might be all right, until it reminded you it wasn't. Tasha Fields didn't have time for delays. She clutched a brown paper bag from the pharmacy as she jogged lightly down Maple Avenue, her keys jingling against her hip. Her sister was sick, bad flu, nothing life-threatening, but enough to make Tasha drop everything and make a mid-afternoon run. She had court in 2 hours. Civil defense work. She liked it, believed in it, believed in people, even when they disappointed her. But this wasn't about her job. This was just a quick errand on a sunny day in the neighborhood she'd lived in for 8 years. So when the siren chirped behind her, short, sharp, unmistakable, her first instinct wasn't fear. It was confusion. She turned, brows furrowed, as a black and white patrol SUV pulled over to the curb beside her. 2 officers stepped out. One older, square-jawed, his sunglasses reflecting the heat off the pavement. The other younger, trying hard not to look unsure. "You in a hurry, ma'am?" the older one asked, stepping into her path before she could respond. "Just heading home," Tasha replied calmly, shifting the bag to her other hand. "Can I help you?" The younger one tilted his head, trying to peer into her tote bag. "We got a report of suspicious activity. You match the description." Tasha blinked. "I'm carrying Tylenol and cough drops. What's suspicious about that?" The older officer narrowed his eyes. "Mind showing us some ID?" She sighed, reaching slowly for her wallet, her movements deliberate. "I'm not resisting, but I'd like to know what I'm being stopped for." The air shifted, subtle but sudden. The younger officer took a half step forward. The older one tensed, as if her question itself was a challenge. That was the moment it changed, from routine to charged. And she felt it. It wouldn't matter that she was calm, that she was polite, that she knew the law, that she was the law. Because to them, right now, she was just a black woman with a bag on the sidewalk. And that was enough to raise suspicion. And what neither of them knew, what would shatter the foundation of this encounter, was that the woman they were trying to pin down was an officer of the court, a public defense attorney, a fighter of wrongful arrests, a woman who knew her rights. This wasn't going to go the way they thought. Tasha's fingers hovered over her wallet, slow, practiced. She'd had the talk with her nephews, her godson, even a few students during Know Your Rights workshops at the community center. No sudden moves. Stay calm. Stay firm. Be smart. Now, she had to take her own advice. The older officer stepped closer. "Ma'am, we're not going to ask again. ID now." Her heart beat steady, but loud in her ears. She pulled out her license and handed it over without a word. The younger cop took it, eyes darting between the card and her face. His mouth moved slightly, as if reading her name to himself. Then he froze. The older one noticed. "What is it?" She's an attorney," the younger officer said, blinking. "A public defender." A pause, just long enough to feel like a drop in pressure. The older cop took the ID, looked it over, then looked at Tasha again. This time, not with suspicion, but something closer to irritation. Or maybe embarrassment. But he didn't step back. Instead, he doubled down. "Still doesn't explain what you're doing walking around with that bag. This neighborhood's had some issues lately." Tasha's jaw tightened. "You mean this neighborhood, where I've lived since 2017, where I work with tenants fighting evictions and kids trying to stay out of the system you enforce?" The officer's mouth twitched. "You don't need to get defensive." She stepped forward, not aggressively, just enough to reclaim space. "I'm not defensive. I'm observant. You stopped me with no probable cause, questioned me like a suspect, and escalated when I asked for basic clarity. And if I hadn't been carrying this," she lifted the pharmacy bag slightly, "you might have kept pushing until this turned into something uglier." The younger officer shifted uncomfortably. "I'd like my ID back," she added. He handed it over without a word. A silence fell between them, the kind thick with discomfort and unspoken recognition. The older cop glanced at the younger one, then back at her. "Have a good day," he muttered. Tasha took her license, slid it back into her wallet, and stepped around them. But before she walked away, she turned. "I'll see you again," she said, voice quiet but certain. And next time, it'll be across a courtroom. She didn't say it as a threat. She said it like a promise. Tasha walked the last 3 blocks home with the kind of awareness that felt like a second skin, hyper-present, every sound and shadow tinged with the residue of that encounter. Her keys jangled as she unlocked her front door. She didn't even take her shoes off. The bag of medicine landed on the kitchen counter untouched. She stood there for a moment, her hands pressed against the cool marble, the silence of the house both calming and sharp. This wasn't the first time, but it was the first time they'd look her name up and realize who she was. That she was more than what they saw, a black woman in sweats with natural curls pulled into a quick bun. They didn't expect credentials. They never do. She opened her laptop and began typing. It wasn't just about reporting them, though she would. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about record-keeping. About ensuring that when people came to her with stories of misconduct, she could say, "Yes, me too." And I wrote it down. The officers' names. Their badge numbers. The exact language. "We got a report of suspicious activity. Do you always carry a book like that?" "No. Wait, that was a different case." Same tone, though. Same assumptions. She filed the encounter in a growing digital folder. One she'd labeled, Eastwood Pattern, Stops Without Cause. Then she opened a different file. One for a case she was taking next week. A young woman arrested for disorderly conduct at a gas station after refusing to give her phone to a police officer. Tasha smiled bitterly. They're always surprised when the person on the other side of the courtroom looks like the people they try to silence. And just as she thought that, her phone buzzed. A message from the public defender's office. "Judge Ramirez. New case assigned. Excessive force during detainment." She clicked the file and froze. Defendants: Officer Raymond Sloan, Officer Eric Dent. Her pulse skipped. Those names. The 2 from today. They were going to be in court. And she had just been assigned as their opposing counsel. This time, they'd be the ones explaining themselves. The courtroom was quiet when Tasha entered. Not the stillness of peace, but the kind that settles before a storm. Papers shuffled softly, the court clerk tapping keys. A few officers loitered by the back door, their radios turned low. The energy in the room shifted when Tasha walked in, not because they knew her, but because her presence always brought that hush. Like something unexpected had just entered their carefully drawn lines. She walked with calm purpose, black slacks, blazer sharp, her hair in a low twist, no paper bag or pharmacy errand to obscure who she was. She took her seat at the defense table and opened her file. The case was textbook abuse of authority. A teenager roughed up during a curfew enforcement, pushed to the pavement hard enough to need stitches. Witnesses. Body cam footage. It should have been a slam-dunk disciplinary case. But the moment the prosecution team entered, followed by the defendants, everything clicked into place. There they were. Officer Sloan. Officer Dent. They walked in like this was routine. Dent wore a smirk. Sloan looked vaguely annoyed, like the process itself was an inconvenience. Until they saw her. Dent faltered mid-step. Sloan froze for half a breath. They recognized her. Tasha didn't smile. She didn't blink. She simply watched them the way she'd been watched on the sidewalk. Calm. Controlled. Unflinching. The bailiff called the court to order. All rise. And in that moment, as everyone stood and the judge entered, it was no longer the sidewalk, or her quiet street, or a sunlit afternoon run. It was her arena, and they weren't in control anymore. Courtroom air always had a certain weight to it, like secrets and sweat woven into the fabric of every bench. But today, that weight felt personal. Tasha sat poised, pen in hand, as the prosecution began with its opening remarks. She barely heard them. She was focused on the 2 officers seated across the aisle, Sloan and Dent. They weren't looking at her now. Not directly. But every so often, she caught the flicker of a sideways glance. Dent shifted in his seat, arms crossed tighter. Sloan rubbed the back of his neck, as if trying to scrape off recognition. The victim's testimony came first. A 17-year-old black boy named Andre Parker. He spoke in a low voice, glancing nervously toward the officers. I was walking home. Curfew was in 10 minutes, but I was just 3 blocks away. They pulled up fast, lights flashing, No warning. One of them grabbed me, pushed me down. Tasha leaned in slightly. Which one, Andre? He looked over. The one with the square jaw. Him. He pointed toward Officer Sloan. And the other? He didn't stop it. He just laughed. Said something like, bet he won't do that again. Gasps rippled through the small crowd seated in the gallery. Tasha nodded. Thank you, Andre. You did good. When she sat back, she noticed Sloane's fists clenched on the table. Dent leaned in to whisper something, but Sloane didn't respond. His jaw was tight enough to crack. Next came the footage. Not from body cams. They had mysteriously malfunctioned, but from a security camera across the street. It showed everything. Andre walking calmly. The patrol car swerving sharply. Sloane's silhouette rushing out, Dent behind him. The tackle. The shove. Andre crumpling to the sidewalk. There was no sound, but the image was loud. Tasha didn't look at the jury. She didn't need to. The room had already made its judgment. But she was still waiting for her moment. Because soon, they'd call the officers to testify. And when they did, they'd be sitting across from the same black woman they tried to handcuff on a sidewalk for looking suspicious. The only difference? Now she had the mic. The courtroom was heavy with silence as Officer Sloan took the stand. His uniform looked a little too crisp, like armor. His mouth was tight, eyes flicking anywhere but toward Tasha. The oath echoed off the walls. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Sloan nodded stiffly. I do. The prosecutor opened gently, giving him room to explain himself. Sloan stuck to the same rehearsed line. They were responding to a curfew violation, believed the boy might be armed, used reasonable force to ensure compliance. Then, it was Tasha's turn. She rose slowly, deliberately, like gravity bent a little around her. Officer Sloan, she began, her tone measured. Let's go back to the night in question. You say you believed Mr. Parker might have been armed? Yes. It was dark. He was wearing a hoodie. His hands were in his pockets. So your assumption was based on what? A silhouette? A hooded sweatshirt? He hesitated. And his behavior. He didn't stop right away. Did he run? No. Did he reach for anything? No. She stepped closer. So let me get this straight. A black teenager in a hoodie, walking calmly, 3 blocks from home. That was enough for you to justify force? His jaw flexed. It was a judgment call. She paused. Let that sit. Tell me, Officer Sloan, have you ever mistaken a lawyer walking home from a pharmacy for a suspect? Silence. A pulse in his temple twitched. You remember me, don't you? She said softly. The jury leaned forward, sensing something unscripted. You stopped me 2 weeks ago on Maple. No report. No cause. Just 2 officers and a woman in sweatpants. You remember? Sloan stared at her, his mouth slightly open. I wasn't holding anything suspicious. Just medicine. And a license that made you pause. A beat. You treated me like I didn't belong. Objection, the defense lawyer barked. Relevance. The judge leaned in. Counselor, tie it directly to the case. Tasha nodded. I will. She turned back to Sloan. I'm not here for an apology, officer. I'm here to show a pattern. Because what you did to me in the quiet of a sidewalk, you did to Andre on a louder stage. And it's not just about bruises. It's about who you see when you look at us. Her voice didn't rise, but the truth rang loud enough to shake windows. Sloan looked away. Tasha stepped back. No further questions, Your Honor. The tension in the courtroom didn't snap. It settled. Like smoke after a fire. Officer Sloan stepped down, slower than he had gone up. His shoulders had slumped. Dent patted him on the back as he passed, but the gesture lacked conviction. Now it was Dent's turn. He climbed the steps to the witness stand with less bravado than usual. His smirk was gone. His hands fidgeted under the table. When he swore the oath, his voice was low, barely audible. Tasha watched him carefully. Unlike Sloan, Dent didn't lead. He followed. He laughed. He leaned on others to justify his complicity. So when she rose to question him, she did it with a different kind of precision. Officer Dent, did you ever once tell your partner to stop? No, he muttered. Did you believe Mr. Parker posed a threat? I wasn't sure. You weren't sure, and yet you stood by while your partner tackled a minor? I thought he might have been carrying something. She tilted her head. But you didn't see anything? No. She let the silence answer for him. You know what I find interesting? She asked, pacing slowly. The language. Might have been carrying something. Didn't stop right away. These vague, elastic reasons you stretch over black bodies to justify harm. Objection. Sustained. But the damage was done. Tasha leaned in, locking eyes with Dent. You didn't stop him because, in that moment, you didn't see a child. You saw a threat. And threats, in your training, don't get the benefit of doubt. Dent blinked. His mouth opened. No words came out. No further questions. She sat down, every nerve in her body pulsing. Not with rage. With clarity. She hadn't raised her voice once. But the room was quieter than it had been all day. And somewhere in the back row, Andre sat straighter. For the first time since the incident, he looked less like a defendant in waiting, and more like a person being seen. The courtroom emptied slowly that afternoon, like people were unsure whether they'd actually just witnessed what they had. Conversations hummed in low tones. A few heads turned toward Tasha as she packed her bag, some with quiet admiration, others with unease. But she didn't need applause. She needed change. Andre walked up as she slid her notebook into her case. His hoodie was a little too big, sleeves swallowed his wrists, but he stood tall now. Miss Fields. She looked up. I wanted to say thank you. Tasha gave a small smile. You don't owe me that. What they did to you shouldn't have happened. He hesitated. You said something in there. About how they didn't see me as a kid. His voice trailed off. He looked down. They didn't, she said softly. But that's not on you. That's the lens they carry. He nodded, eyes rimmed with something like recognition. Or maybe grief. My mom said I should keep my head down. Not make it worse. But you. She closed her bag. Keeping our heads down never protected us. It just made it easier for them not to see us. A beat passed. I want to study law, he blurted. It caught her off guard. She smiled for real this time. Then do it. And when you get there, don't forget what brought you. He nodded again, this time firmer. Across the room, Dent and Sloan slipped out quietly, escorted by their attorney. Sloan kept his head low. Dent didn't look back. The judge scheduled closing arguments for the following day. But Tasha already knew what she'd say, because it wasn't just about bruises or protocol. It was about perception, and the cost of not being seen for who you are. The next morning, the courtroom filled faster than before. News had started to spread. Not headlines yet, but whispers. About the public defender who'd flipped the script. About the officers who suddenly looked very small beneath the weight of their own authority. Tasha stood at the podium as closing arguments began. Her voice was calm, steady, unapologetically clear. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she began. We've heard a lot of justifications over the past 2 days. Talk of curfews, of hoodies, of body language. She let her gaze settle on each of them. But I want to remind you that the law is not based on feelings. It's based on facts. And the facts here are simple. A child was assaulted. By people trained to protect him. She took a short breath. Measured. You saw the video. You heard the victim. You listened to the officers. How quick they were to blame their instincts, but not once take responsibility for the damage they caused. Her tone deepened. This case is not just about Andre Parker. It's about every young person who's learned to shrink themselves to survive. It's about the systems that reward force over fairness. And it's about truth. A pause. I stood on that sidewalk. Those same officers looked at me and saw someone who didn't belong. A suspect. Not a citizen. Not a lawyer. Not a neighbor. She stepped away from the podium now. No notes. Just truth. But when I stand here, I don't speak just for myself. I speak for Andre. For every parent who's held their breath when their kid left the house. For every person who's ever been presumed guilty before a word was said. Her voice softened, but didn't waver. This is your moment. To say, that isn't justice. And we won't allow it to hide behind a badge. She gave a slight nod and returned to her seat. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge looked momentarily unsettled. And the jury? The jury was listening. Really listening. The jury was excused just after noon. Tasha stepped into the hallway, the courtroom doors swinging shut behind her with a soft thud, like the echo of everything unsaid still trapped inside. She found herself standing near a water fountain, watching the bailiff pace behind the frosted glass. The corridors of justice always looked so sterile, so official, but she knew better. These walls were thick with history, most of it unspoken. Marisol, another public defender, approached quietly. "You wrecked them in there," she said, offering a paper cup of water. Tasha took it but didn't drink. "I didn't wreck them," she murmured. "I held a mirror up. What they saw, that's on them." Marisol gave a knowing nod. Still, they needed to see it. Across the hallway, Andre and his mother sat on a bench, their hands clasped tightly. His hoodie looked cleaner today, his posture straighter. His eyes met Tasha's briefly, just long enough for a small, uncertain smile to pass between them. Inside, the jury deliberated. 1 hour passed, then 2. At hour 3, word came down. The jury has reached a verdict. The hallway stirred with hushed movement. Officers stood up straighter. Lawyers tucked folders under their arms. Tasha straightened her blazer and smoothed her skirt. Back inside the courtroom, the air was electric. The jury filed in, eyes fixed forward, heavy with the weight of their responsibility. Tasha folded her hands in front of her on the desk. The foreperson stood. "In the case of Officer Raymond Sloan and Officer Eric Dent," she said, voice steady, "we, the jury, find the defendants." And the breath in the room held still. "Guilty." The word struck the room like a ripple through glass. Guilty of excessive force, of violating civil rights under color of authority. Andre gasped softly beside his mother. She clutched his hand tighter, her eyes wet before the rest of her could even catch up. Tasha closed her eyes for just a moment, not in celebration, but in release. Like letting go of a breath she'd held through the whole trial. Not for victory, for validation. Judge Reynolds nodded solemnly, his gavel striking once. "Sentencing will be scheduled within 30 days. Officers Sloan and Dent, your badges are hereby suspended pending further disciplinary review." The two men stood stiffly, their attorney whispering something urgent neither of them seemed to hear. Sloan looked toward Tasha, just for a second. His expression wasn't rage. It was recognition. The moment was brief. And then they were led away, not in handcuffs, but not untouched. Justice, imperfect as it was, had landed. Tasha turned to Andre. "You did this," she said quietly. He shook his head. "We did." Reporters began filtering in. People in the gallery murmured. Phones lit up. But Tasha didn't stay for the chatter. She gathered her notes and made for the exit. The work was never just in the courtroom. It was in every stop, every glance, every assumption. Outside, the sun was warm again. Same as the day they stopped her. But the world had shifted. Just slightly. Weeks later, the courtroom felt different. No longer tense. No longer haunted. Just quiet. Like it was ready for something new. Sentencing day had arrived. Sloan and Dent sat at the defendant's table in civilian clothes now. No uniforms, no badges. The power they once wielded so effortlessly hung loose and distant. Judge Reynolds spoke clearly, without drama. "Given the gravity of the offense and the abuse of authority demonstrated, this court orders the following. Officer Sloan, 12 months of probation, mandatory community service, and permanent removal from active duty. Officer Dent, 6 months probation, with the same terms." Tasha didn't flinch. She hadn't expected prison. Not from this court. But the record mattered. The precedent mattered. The world had seen. After court, Andre approached her one last time. "They asked if I wanted to speak today," he said, eyes thoughtful. "But I said no." "That's okay," she replied. "I didn't want to give them more of me," he explained. "They already took enough. I'd rather save my voice for something that builds." Tasha smiled, full and proud. "You're going to be one hell of a lawyer." They stood in silence a moment longer, letting the moment settle. Then, he walked out with his mother, steps steady. Later that week, Tasha sat on a panel at a community forum titled Justice in Practice. Someone asked her how she stayed hopeful. She paused, then answered, "Because every time someone's silenced and we speak, the system shifts. Not fast, not clean, but enough. And when that shift comes from someone they tried to erase, that's justice bending toward truth." The audience applauded. But Tasha wasn't looking for applause. She was already scanning the room, watching for the next Andre, because the fight never ended. But neither did she. Thank you for watching. Subscribe me and hit the notification bell to not miss new stories. Bye.